Well, welcome back to our Interfaith Explorations on Spiritual Literacy. I am Sophia Said, your host for this class, Executive Director for the Interfaith Center, which has the mission to reduce to reduce the fear and prejudice among world religions. So, I am very happy to be back in our safe space where we have discussions about the self, about universe, about the sacred through a spiritual lens. And along with me is Dr. Jay McDaniels, who is my colleague and my teacher. Let me see if I can find a way to spotlight you um, here. So, along with me is Dr. Jay McDaniel, our moderator for the class. McDaniel is a teacher at the Interfaith Center, but also serves on the board of Cobb Institute in California, which is named in the honor of the founder, John Cobb, who promotes a process and relational way of understanding and living in the world. I introduced Cobb Institute because Cobb Institute is the co-sponsor for our winter session of these classes. Our today's guest is Len Deloney, and Len will share his own personal journey with cancer. He was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 1970 around the times of Thanksgiving. And as his chemo and radiation started, his transformational journey also started with that. So today we are very, very fortunate to have Len with us who will share his transformative journey. And our letter of the day, as you can tell from the topic, is T for transformation. But before we go to Len, so firstly, thank you, Len, for joining us and welcome to our class. Before we go to Len, I would like Jay to say a few words about the letter T for transformation, and then we will have Len share his story with you all.
Well, I'll do so. And I'm so glad to have Len with us. He's a minister of spiritual formation at First United Methodist Church in Dallas, Texas, and went to Chicago Theological Seminary and got a doctorate of ministry there, and has studied at an institute called the Shalem Institute for spiritual formation. I studied there too, and it helps people to learn to become spiritual friends, spiritual counselors. But Len was also a student of mine. And one of my only claims to fame as a teacher is that I taught a course in which Len met his now wife, Becca. And they met in my class. It was contemporary theology. In all honesty, I don't think I did a very good job in that class, with one exception. They got to sit next to each other and get to know each other, and they're married and they have 2 children.
I was going to give a shout out to you, and thanks, and actually got very much from that class as well.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Len. Our letter for today is T for transformation. And transformation can be personal transformation, and it can also be social transformation. And I know that at this time in America's life, many of us glimpse, yearn for, hope for some kind of transformation of not simply of consciousness, but of how we interact with one another and how we see one another. Particularly if we're on different sides of a political divide or a cultural divide. So I want to take note of the importance of T for transformation and simply acknowledge that there's a yearning for that all over our country today. And sometimes when you seek transformation, you don't really know exactly what it looks like, but you feel it nonetheless. You feel the hope for it. But if we're going to be transformed socially, it also helps if we're acquainted with transformation personally. And we're never just transformed once, and it can be very gradual. But we need to know what it's like to change and to be thrown into situations where we have to reframe things and think of our lives in new ways. In some ways, become new people. So Len has a story that he's going to tell, and it's about his journey with cancer. And as Sophia said, it started very early. So he was in that journey when he was a student of mine. I knew Len in just one little portion of that journey, but it's a much longer journey. And it continues, and we're all on some kind of journey along those lines. If cancer's not our dis-ease, something is. And how to live with that and make something creative of it. How can what is painful become compost for new life? That's transformation. So Len, would you tell us a little bit about your story? And we're so glad you're here. And we're glad your dad's here too.
Yeah, I am too. And
my your sister, huh?
Dad and sister both had very much to do with helping to hold me in grace, where that experience could become more of a transformative kind of experience in a positive way. Not that it was all easy by any means, but I think that's one of the things that we all are kind of called at that deeper level to be for one another, is the kind of caring, holding in community. And so Jay, all that you said is kind of what I was thinking too. So you must have taught me well. And I guess, that's all that needs to be said, right? No, I really think I really resonated with what you were saying about it, and think of transformation certainly not as a destiny or an objective that we try to get to, but we're in the midst of whatever that we are in. How do we find space within ourselves and with others to not react so much to what's going on with the sort of desire to go around it or to be numb to it? I mean, I have nothing against painkillers when they're needed. I really appreciated it at times. But to make sure that there's space to go into the deeper truth and honesty. And our culture is makes a lot of money off of addictions of all sorts. And it has to do with busyness and trying to feel in control. I was a hospital chaplain for a good while at an addictions treatment center, was one of the areas. And I learned a lot there. Jumping way ahead, part of my journey is that there's so many ways that we can be encouraged and make money, even encouraging people to not go deep. It's sort of like the frame that we have in our culture have had is very much driven by a pace that kind of gets into competition and judgment. And it's not like it was new in our lifetimes, but I think we've taken it to a higher and higher level in ways. And at the same time, we have the opportunity to go more and more intentionally deeper as community. There's just people who have been very wise throughout the ages in our spiritual religious traditions. And I'm so grateful for what y'all are doing with the interfaith opportunities, because I think that we all have a kind of a fearful clinging to almost a fundamentalist reactive addiction within our communities and cultures around the world. And we all have those who realize the sacred journey of going deeper into whatever is with an awareness, a presence, a kind of way of being in the middle of it, the way of seeing that the traditional song in Christianity, Amazing Grace, I once was blind, but now I see. There is radical, and transformation to me is ongoing, lifelong. And if we ever think we're the experts, then as Jay was saying, we were laughing several weeks ago, then we need to make tea. Just stop for a minute and let ourselves be open, because this wisdom of I think our inner connectedness, that is the place of our beginning in all creation, that becomes more real. And I think that's the ultimate truth. So I'm kind of jumping ahead from my story, but throughout my life, I've had a sense of deep calling that wouldn't let go. that I needed to follow through my own story. Where is the sense of the power of compassion and the meaning and purpose that emerges, not something that we figure out in our logical mind. It may be a part of the dialogue that goes within and with others, but there's an experiential aspect that we can't really connect with unless we let go in ways. And so much of our culture is not about letting go, it's about holding on and competing. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it certainly needs to be rooted and grounded in what I think of as this openness to being in that transformative journey lifelong. So, I mean, the Buddhists talk about beginner's mind. I mean, there's a sense of in the mind, not just being in the head, but integrated throughout who we are, body, mind, and spirit. And I think that one other thing, I was so delighted to watch the one episode I've seen from last Wednesday. And at one point near the end, I had already been thinking about it, but Jay asked the question about, well, have you ever thought, or what do you think about synchronicity? And I had been laughing to myself because I was aware one of the most transformative events of Crisis for Mike, who presented last week, was when his son, who was 13 years old, same age as me, was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I don't want to make direct kind of literal meaning questions, but I think these kind of patterns that we notice out of our own story, and when we connect with other people and their stories, it's like it opens up a window to the awareness of seeing meaning and purpose and connection and compassion. So I had to laugh. The other synchronicity I want to mention real quickly is during listening to that, I was thinking about what we have in centering prayer, something else connected with that, sitting quietly, kind of like going to the gym, sitting quietly for 20 minutes. And during the day, thinking of welcoming prayer is a way of welcoming what is, so not to be so reactive. But the key phrase or poem is I was thinking, I'm going to read the Rumi poem next week, and then y'all beat me to it. So you read the Guest House and that kind of welcoming what is from Rumi. So again, I think we have people over the ages who have known and communicated it in various ways through arts and the way that they've lived out their life. And in our time, we are in the biggest crisis worldwide. And so it's also the biggest challenge and opportunity for us to connect one with another across faith, across whatever, and be noticing the bridges that are being built. So it's kind of like it is emerging. It wants to happen. I've joked about when I had cancer, was diagnosed with cancer, I was pretty competitive and very much into school. And I don't know if it had to do with chemo brain or I had meningoencephalitis, swollen brain, various things, but my perspective changed radically. And it may have been just the vulnerability and finding my way into that. But I laugh about seeing synergistic constellations. I mean, there are things that, in a sense, the universe is inviting us to lean into. And the more that we notice, the more we can share in that and learn from one another. This morning, real quickly,
Hey, Len.
Yeah.
Remember to tell us your story, though.
I will.
Okay?
This is the last thing I'll say, and I'll move right into it. This morning, we had a group that we call Practicing Prayerful Presence, and we were talking about a new book, Right Here, Right Now, that we were looking at. And there was an analogy of this spiritual journey and I think what causes us to see in transformative ways. And they were comparing it to the book. I don't know if people are aware, there's the book that was popular that had patterns. And if you looked at it intentionally, trying to figure it out, it just like patterns. But if you had soft eyes and kind of looked at it, eventually you would notice that there was this three-dimensional picture within it. And that kind of soft eyes as our life unfolds is, to me, one of the crucial things, to not be as reactive. Well, and as I was saying, I was 13 when I came home from football practice, discovered a knot on my neck on a Friday, the 13th, and I sort of, with the help of my dad, learned to reframe 13 as a lucky number in a sense to notice what needed to be known. Also, is my favorite fishing lure. But by the next Thursday, I was at St. Jude, had been diagnosed with cancer. And that time right before Thanksgiving, I just was totally overwhelmed. It felt like total chaos, and scary. And I learned very quickly, with some of the medication I had to take each night, pills, procarbazine, 3 capsules. And I started waking up in the middle of the night, throwing up as hard as I had ever. And I kind of learned that I didn't want to take it. And I not that I intentionally made myself sick, but sometimes it would take an hour and a half to get 3 pills down at night before going to bed, and then waking up getting sick. So I lost a lot of weight during that time, 115 down to about 75 pounds over a 6-month period. So it was really overwhelming. The best I could do was kind of numb myself through a lot of it. I was aware of other people, kind of the sense of compassion, realizing parents were struggling every bit as much as the kids at times in different ways. But I was 13, I could see that. But one of the profound transformative moments for me, which was both a moment and then kind of moved me into a whole series of ways of being and seeing. I was too sick to go to school after I'd come back from Memphis at St. Jude after 6 months, and I was at home. And I was not at school, I had a homebound teacher, but I just kind of walked out in the backyard, which I was showing back. We have a view of the backyard here. And to me, it woke me up in a way, with the struggle and the sense of chaos. I just was present to the birds and the squirrels and the smells and all of the senses in the moment, and realized I was part of something bigger. I wasn't isolated. And later on put into the words Henry Nouwen and others, that solitude, and that I could feel isolated and alone in a group of people, or I could feel that interconnection when I was alone. But that interconnection had to do with, for me, part the community in the backyard, with part of God's creation, with nature. And I began to have really intimate experiences with birds, and in ways that I knew them personally in a way. And to me, that helped me discover healing and wholeness that was a very different aspect than the chemo and radiation and surgery that I had. But real quickly, I had, after a year of treatment, I went back to school. For a while, I didn't want to get back with people my age. I just felt like they didn't understand. I wanted to hang around adults, and finally made a choice. Okay, it's time to get back in. And I got involved in things that 8th graders and 9th graders were involved in, and then had a relapse. And it was, in ways, it was more serious, and they had to do more surgery, a new kind, from my kidneys to move them to get out of the way from one another, and various things that were potentially really stressful. And I had one cousin who said, you may not make it. And so I was really aware of being potentially on the edge of dying. But I was also kind of aware in this journey of following that sense of awareness in the moment, in nature, for me at that time, being such a powerful holding for me and way of connecting. So I began to become aware of it in my breathing and that sort of ways of being present. And so when I had that surgery and then had more radiation and chemo, more harsh in ways, I didn't have as much time and difficult time physically or spiritually, I guess. I had been learning something that was helping me to trust, to let go of the anxiety at a level enough not to be ignoring it, like I was saying, the addictions, sort of in denial, but to kind of live into it more. And so then my final hospitalization, I had, was in remission. Final hospitalization was when I was getting really sick and choking actually on throwing up. It was very scary. So I went into St. Jude my last time in 12th grade in 1976. And they couldn't find what was going on. And I was aware after the time of ways that I could kind of influence the drops, almost like biofeedback. And so I kind of explored wondering what's going on. And at that time, one of the physicians, I think, trying to help out a nurse who maybe thought there was a teenager pinching trying to get attention, which wasn't happening. I was just experimenting with biofeedback in a sense. So there's nothing wrong with him. And for me, that echoed over the years, that a lot of times when it seems like there's nothing wrong with people, there's something else going on underneath there. And and so my calling very much became how to meet people where they are and help them, invite them to be hospitable to what they're experiencing and even share that with others. So that really took a trajectory that went on into, like I said, a called ministry specifically to help people in their struggles, their times of pain. I've been a hospice chaplain and find healing in the midst of dying even, but to really be able to move into the difficult kinds of situations in our lives that are crisis, and not to minimize, but to find ways to get it out there and then dive deeper into what that I think the universe is saying here. Here's healing that can happen. And how do we live into that? And how do we support one another in that? One last thing I'll say, because I don't want to, I mean, I can tell more story, but so I went to Hendrix College where Jay was teaching. And the first 2 years I was thinking maybe, pre-med or pharmacy or something like that, related to what I had experienced. And after 2 years, I realized this is not clicking. This is not really what I'm supposed to be about. So I actually left for a year and worked for a while between my sophomore and junior year, and traveled and then started PBS and NPR and various ways that I was learning about things that I felt really passionate about and excited about. And so then after a year and a little bit more, I returned to Hendrix and thought I was going to go into psychology. And at the time I realized this isn't quite it either. It's a little bit too data oriented and not enough personal connected. And then I learned about the Rainey Building, where the philosophers and religious folk would hang out. And that's where I met Jay. And so it was just a few years after my last hospitalization, and his introducing me to people like Paul Tillich, and that your doubts and your questions can actually be part of deepening faith rather than don't ask questions, just believe. So that was a radical shift for me, another invitation to live into what I'm experiencing in a way that finds healing and the sacredness in it for all of us. I can stop there, or if people have questions or comments about their own experience, I'm really open to whatever seems most helpful.
Len, I want to ask you a question or two before we open it up. Can you talk about, were you Christian in your mind? You embraced the Christian faith as part of your perspective, is that right?
Yeah, I can give just a little bit of background, but go ahead with your question.
And did your understanding of Christianity change over the years? I think that might be interesting to people. And I could also ask the question of God. I know that trust in something more was part of your life, still is. And that something more was certainly found in nature, among other places. So if you could just say a brief word about your journey in Christianity and or your understanding of God, I think that might be a way to kind of bring it to a close, and we'll open it up for everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. And I had thought about saying some things about that, but I didn't want to cover too many things. I actually, and my dad is here. He was part of Trinity Episcopal Church and went back more generations. And so my great grandparents there's a window at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral that's near the baptismal area. And so I was very aware and appreciative of the Episcopal liturgy and a sense of mystical connection in that. And I also, from my mom's side, had Methodist connections in Danville, Arkansas, and felt a good sense of the community in that way too. But at that particular time, when I was 13, and I remember the dean coming and visiting us at our house. And he was a very powerful kind of presence. And he had his traditional collar and coming to the house. And, I'm not even sure if he anointed me or not, but I mainly remember it was kind of scary. And not that that was necessarily a bad thing. I think the sense of awe is really very important in going deeper. But I didn't find the real support at that time, maybe even a little bit more with some of the Methodist community stuff. But for a while, I also had a relative who had experienced cancer as a 19-year-old. She was born in 29. And so she was very passionate about what she found helpful. And I did find many things helpful from her about engaging not just as a passive patient and having spirituality as part of that. But she was charismatic Methodist. And what I learned was the enthusiasm of wanting to try to bring, in a sense, the right thing to help. I realized that she didn't have the sensitivity to meet us where we were, or me where I was. And so I ended up more thinking about family systems and what's going on here. I learned a lot, but it wasn't so much. What it was in part, I came out of that time with the help of nature and the help of some of the classes and conversations that we had, more of what I call a contemplative orientation. And mindfulness is now often the term that gets traction. And that's the name of this book, is Be Here, Right Here, Right Now, the practice of Christian mindfulness. And it's partly to help people who do identify as Christian realize that there's this deep emphasis on presence. And to me, in ways, that kind of experiential, open-hearted passion, which is often part of the charismatic movement, also I began to learn had practices of letting go of what might be the ego's excitement or enthusiasm and kind of running ahead of where that deeper knowing and waiting for the mystery, in a sense, to guide us. So, for a while I thought I was, more interested in Zen Buddhism or something, but then I found, and partly with your help, to realize, there's a whole lot in Christianity in some ways that's been overlooked. And so I've been to conferences and things that have that very perspective, that especially now is important to recover that deep awareness of presence within Christianity, cosmic Christ. There's ways that are very powerful for me as Christian, but that are also very open to the mystery in various ways that people can come to that. And it's very important because right now what we have are some really bad examples that play out politically and are a very big threat, that are that kind of fundamentalist, reactive, fearful part that it's not good press.
I think one way to, we in this group, we come from multiple traditions. Sophia's Muslim. We have some Jewish folks, some Christian folks, some spiritual but not religious folks.
Mm-hmm.
We're pretty typical of America today.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those that are religiously identified, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, yearn for a contemplative dimension to their tradition,
Mm-hmm.
some way of tapping into their tradition that helps them become more open and find some kind of peace of heart and not be legalistic or doctrinaire.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Len, one last question, then I promise I'll open it up. How about God? And really, what I'm particularly interested in is, did you have a sense of God as a personal presence, someone that you could pray to and, and heard, a listener in the cosmos? That would be a personal understanding of God. A transpersonal would be more like God is energy, God is connectedness, God is the mystery, but not so congealed in the form of a personal presence with whom you could have an interactive relationship. And I'm sure in our group, we have people on both sides and in between and none of the above. So there's certainly not a right answer to that. But did you have a sense of God, and did it change over the years or not?
Yeah, it definitely changed over the years. And I'll, I think early on there was kind of a personal sense that was kind of normal for kids, and then moving into it with, I really struggled with questions at St. Jude with what is God's power about, and does everything that happens, is that something that God wants to happen? And I really was having trouble thinking, I'm not sure I can trust God if to prove a point, this little kid over here, this little baby, and doesn't have any clue what's going on, but knows about the difficulty. If that's what God's intention was, I wasn't sure. And so I got to the point where I wasn't sure there was a God, especially in contrast to my relatives who were very much about, if you know what the 700 Club is, with Pat Robertson and the like, they were very much in tune with that and wanting me to watch it. And I tried for a while and realized this isn't quite it for me. And I thought, well, maybe I'm an atheist. So I kind of, realized if that's what it is to be Christian. But then I floated enough, and then partly with the help of your class and process theology, that helped me come to much better articulation of what my experience was like in many ways. And eventually I got to sense that along the way that there's only so far you can go with that. And so my answer to your question is yes, and both, and in a way. It's very much to me about this mystery of energy that in a way is sort of let go of certainly the egos wanting to make it that kind of, not staying there. Maybe it can meet us there, but that it's much more of a flow of grace, and that we can experience it in ways, and that it somehow has this, Richard Rohr does a lot of talking about the Trinity and the relationships and the self-emptying of the creator, redeemer, sustainer, various ways of thinking about the Trinity. And that's, in a personal relational sense, that's also meaningful for me. But yeah, it changed over years, certainly, and many different times, and most often when there was a crisis of, and not just physical. I remember I was working at Weiler Children's Hospital at University of Chicago, and went back to where they were doing bone marrow transplants, and people coming from all around back in the late 80s, early 90s. And at one point there was a boy that was 12 years old, came up from Mexico. I really identified closely with him. We had a good relationship. But one time I was with him and praying, and he just started screaming, and in pain and maybe hallucinating. But it was such a a jolt to what, did I do something to invite him into this space that was too scary? Or was it just I didn't know. And to me, everything is kind of interconnected anyway, but so you can't completely separate things out, but sort of what's the cause anyway. I went through a crisis there of, is this really my calling? And I was pretty far into it then. And it was not all that long. I mean, just a few days that in working, I was in clinical pastoral education and sort of processed it some with other people, but it became transformative for me as well. So, I mean, part of it is various kinds of crisis can so often be powerfully, in a positive way, transformative, but we can't be in denial about how difficult it is. We have to go into it in some way or another.
Well, Len, thank you so much. And let's now open it up now, and I'll try to get the gallery view. Sophia, can you help there? Get the or do I have the gallery view already? Let's see.
No, I'm on the gallery view. So if
Got
someone's speaking up, I can add them to your discussion.
So I suggest now that anybody that wants to say anything, please do. And you can share a story of transformation if you would like to, or you can ask a question of Len if you'd like to. I want to honor us all that his dad is there. There's Len's dad. You're looking at Len's dad. We'll wave to him. He's 91 years old. Is that right?
Correct.
Well, you're the youngest 91 I think I've ever seen. And we're really glad to have you here. But let's open it up for a bit. Does anybody want to share a story of transformation or ask Len a question? Sally?
This is just really obvious, but I always think about the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. You think that didn't hurt? It's hard work. That's all.
Yeah, and the story about, I don't know where I read it, but somebody who said that they wanted to help them out of that pain and help them out, and they had not done the work to make the wings full enough with whatever the struggle juice was, and so they actually couldn't fly. I mean, that's one place I've read that they need to go through that struggle in order to fly. I mean, it's a pretty good metaphor, definitely. And I think a lot of times we have a tendency to, say various things like that or other examples that are very open-hearted and say, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? And, the sort of the kumbaya comments that are made. One of my professors at Isla School of Theology in Denver was Vincent Harding, and he had worked very closely with Martin Luther King, very close friends. And he has written a lot, and there's wonderful, if people have ever listened to On Being, there's a wonderful On Being interview with Krista Tippett and Vincent Harding, and it's about our time. Is America possible in the sense of a democracy? And anyway, he was just really very powerfully talking about when he was down in the South during the Civil Rights Movement as a young student from the University of Chicago, and some people had died, some friends had died, had been killed, and so they got together and said, we know y'all call your parents, say you're okay. We don't expect you to stay here. We thank you for your support, but we want you to have time to prayerfully listen and talk it over, what you want to do, and we appreciate what you've done. And they were actually singing Kumbaya. And he said, I will never think of Kumbaya as a sweet thing. He said it was so powerful. But when we talk about things, it doesn't have the experience with it sometimes, and it gets easy to dismiss. So it's so important for us to find ways to be more and more connected open-heartedly, to really connect at that level, because it's profound. Thank you for sharing that.
Anybody else want to share a story of transformation? Feel free to anytime, and I'm going to ask a question of us, but if you want to interrupt me and say, hey, I want to tell a story, please do. But I know that sometimes we can think of spirituality as finding peace of mind, a sense of calm, a sense of harmony, a sense of love. But when you take T for transformation and you hear Len's story, it raises the possibility, well, maybe spirituality isn't all about love and peace. Maybe it's also about suffering and struggle and hardship. And so maybe the quest to always avoid hardship is a kind of problem. So I think my question, Meg, I see your hand up. Yeah, is your hand up, Meg? Okay.
Okay, so
whatever I said, please go. Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote down a few words as you two were talking. And you said you went to the Shalem, I don't know what it was, Institute, something like that, which it's a Hebrew word meaning wholeness.
Yeah.
We get the word shalom from it. And the wordplay that occurred to me throughout Len's entire discussion was he discovered a hole within him. And this goes back, Jay, to what you said about dis-ease, that we all have something, right, that we're trying to fix. And from the hole, you seek out wholeness. And from that comes holiness, which is a completely different route, but that's it.
I love that.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something, Jay. I'm Tina. For me anyway, spirituality has definitely involved suffering. There's been a number of things over my life, but my current situation of suffering is I have an alcoholic brother whose liver is so bad that he doesn't qualify for any kind of liver transplant. And he's at an assisted living facility, but he's just gotten out of the hospital for sepsis. And, you know, when you're that vulnerable and your liver's shutting down, then other organs kind of tend to come after that. Anyway, point being, this is very, very difficult for me. I've known about this problem with him for at least 10 years, and I'm sure it's been going on longer than that. But it's just hard because my father died an alcoholic, and my other brother, I think, is possibly addicted to alcohol. And Len, sounds like you've had experience with addicts and with hospice. And this is just really, really, really hard. I've been going to Al-Anon meetings every day since mid-November, sometimes twice a day, and they're wonderful virtual Zoom meetings, and it's really, really, really helped. Nevertheless, there's, you know, I feel like I'm probably going to lose this brother before too many more months. And it's terribly sad, terribly sad. But it is a part of my evolutionary, transforming spiritual experience. Life can really be tough sometimes. And so I really relate to that aspect of spirituality involving suffering. And I feel sure all of us do, because if you live long enough, you're going to have some suffering. That's just the way life is. Thank you.
I really appreciate you sharing, Tina. And I think that, you know, people talk about the importance of having faith. To me, and one of the things that means is trusting in the middle of difficult times that we're being held in some way. You talk about the group that's helpful. this community that you share that with. I think all of that is a kind of a prayerful connecting, kind of connects us with that mystery that holds us and helps us heal and become whole, as we were just saying. Appreciate you sharing that.
I think there's a wholeness, Tina, that includes tragedy and includes sadness, and it's woven into something beautiful. But it includes the sadness. So there's a name for that. It's called tragic beauty. You know, I don't know if that phrase helps, but sometimes when I myself think of God, I don't think of a wholeness that excludes tragedy and sadness. I think of a wholeness that includes tragedy and sadness.
Yeah, I would like to add just a little bit. As a hospital chaplain with psychiatric and addictions treatment, inpatient and some out, I was amazed. I was supposed to interview everybody that came in because we were using the 12-step program as a part of it and sort of how to connect with their sense of religion. And I was amazed at how many people had had a major loss, not necessarily death, often death, a major loss, and they didn't know how to fall apart. They didn't have a community that would hold them. Instead, they had people who'd say, here, let's go feel ourselves by getting really intoxicated, and it started to really become a problem often as a trigger. And we're talking about those triggers can become part of transformation, but it can also be part of what, if we don't have community in part to help us, it's really hard to find what really helps and to bring wholeness in the midst of. And so one of the things I've said for years, and especially after being hospice chaplain, if we wanted to treat addictions, one of the best things we could do is help people in hospice care more, or help people to fall apart in a sense in grieving, but it being okay, because, and to help people learn what they need to do. And it's unique for each person in a way, but it's also a communal thing. But that would, I think that would help us. And during this time of change, there's all kinds of things that should be fair questions as we're sort of deconstructing in the midst of crisis. And how do we really bring in a good way of thinking and trying new things?
I really, really appreciate anyone who's had involvement with hospice. I was actually a type of volunteer for a couple of years. I wrote down a memoir for a hospice patient who was dying, and I wrote it out and typed it out. It ended up being 25 pages long, and I also put it on a CD because this particular man had lost his sight. And then I gave the CDs and the hard copies to his family before he died.
Gift. What a gift.
And oh my goodness, it was such a gift to me. It was a remarkable gift because he had a remarkable story. And I don't know that, hospice is just, I can't say enough nice things about hospice. Both of my parents died under hospice care, and it really, really helped a lot to have that. And I also had people, and all of this occurred with both my parents' death in another state, but the churches, the local churches had, which you may be familiar with, Stephen Ministries, and someone would come to the hospital or the hospice every day. And the particular hospice my father was in, they had churches volunteer, and they would provide daily meals for the patient's family. It was just incredible and so supportive, and it was a very loving environment. So I thank you and everyone else who has been in that kind of situation as either a chaplain or some kind of hospice involvement, because it's truly a wonderful gift.
Thank you.
Jay.
Yes,
Jay, this
please,
is
yes.
Sam.
And I'm sorry, I'm not on video. I'm traveling in the
Okay.
car. But I wanted to mention, I really liked, Len, that statement you made about being able to help people fall apart.
Mm.
For me, learning to listen, the joy of that is just being able to sit with people and let them provide a safe place and let them fall apart. Jay, for me, the biggest transformation that I think I could name right now is that at some point in my life, and it had to have been at least my 50s, maybe 60s, I learned that it's not healthy, or it isn't really possible to go around your sorrows and your difficulties, but we have to go through them. And as long as you try to go around them and fight them, it's a losing situation. And that's been very helpful to me, and also helpful in sharing with others and listening to others, to not try to fix things too prematurely, etc. And I'm a fixer. I really would like to fix things.
Well, the biggest part of transformation for me my entire life, and which was helped tremendously by membership in Al-Anon 30-something years ago, is acceptance. You know, I have to accept what's
Right.
going on, and in most cases I can't change it. But if I accept it and surrender to it, which does not mean give up, it just means accept it and work out rational and helpful ways to deal with it, and not ask, why did this happen? But what can I do now that it has happened? That's what's helped me the most.
We have about 8 minutes or 7 minutes, and I want Sophia to speak to make sure we get to hear from Sophia pretty soon. Sophia, do you want to jump in now, or do you want one more comment and then you jump in?
Let's take one more question or comment.
Okay.
And
All right. Anybody else just like to say anything that comes to your mind? Nita.
Len, I was just curious about what your most helpful ways of meditation are. What do you prefer?
Well, the one that I discovered, and is 50 years ago. It was 50 years ago that I was diagnosed, and nature, being in nature and really being present to what's going on around and feeling myself as belonging as part of that is the one that's most accessible always. There are plenty, like sometimes just taking another breath, taking a second breath or a third, just taking a pause to let go, and it's in the middle of stuff. Like I said, we have, and anybody's welcome to join us, we have a centering prayer group that's part of contemplative outreach that sort of helps to find a way to do, to practice something like 20 minutes a day, although there are lots of variations if you don't quite manage that. And some other things, like, this right here, right now, you're welcome to join us if you want, is practicing prayerful presence on Wednesday mornings. And it's learning some of the traditions within the Christian tradition. But to me, as much as anything, is one of the main things is being present to other people as they tell their story in a deep, honoring way. So that can be in community very much. Parker Palmer is someone who has given me a lot of support. I don't know if y'all can show that near the end, but there's something that you could get online, but it's ego stories and soul stories. And it just kind of gives a comparison. And we so easily or feel pushed to live out of just our ego stories, the wins and the losses. But those times of brokenness are where we can nurture our soul stories and hear them from others and help them go deeper into that. Thanks for your question.
Sophia.
Thank you, Len, and thank you everybody for sharing your own personal stories of how transformation happens in your life. For me personally, I've been thinking about it. I mean, transformation doesn't actually happen with a conversion or a spiritual experience or awakening. When I sent out this email, I wrote something like transformation usually involves shedding of old ways.
Mhm.
And that has been the case with me that for me, transformation really means shedding of old ways or behaviors or actions or relations or project or work because sometimes they become a burden. And interestingly, these behaviors and old ways that I'm talking about, these are the things which are very important to me, things that have defined me, made me who I am, the relations or the behaviors or the thoughts or the opinions or the work that I do. I'm talking about things who have made me who I am and who have been a very important part of my journey, spiritual journey, service journey, social journey. But at some point in time, they would become a burden. And I would realize that it's the time to just let them go because there is no more room for them in my life. And I have to let go of my opinions and my possessions or my ego or my relations or the things that I'm used to or things that I could not do without before. So I have more room to live and grow. So it's been really transformation is for me personally synonymous with letting go, if I may say, of important things in my life. And during this process, um, one of my dear friend who helps me is, you all know him, he's Hafiz, the Persian Sufi mystic and poet from 14th century, and he has been a friend to my soul. And I was thinking when Len was speaking that I would read a poem on transformation today at the end, but actually I want to read a poem which is called To Build a Swing, because anytime when I'm going through this process of change, which happens a lot because not every transformation is a huge transformation, some of them are really small, like getting used to living without WhatsApp, which I'm trying to do for the last 2 days. It's a big transformation. So Hafiz has been a friend to me in all those processes because he helps me see that I have everything that I need to transform myself, and he's so good at that. So I'm going to close today's session with this poem by Hafiz, and I hope he does the same with you, and it's called To Build a Swing. And that's how he goes, and we'll close at this poem. To build a swing, you carry all the ingredients to turn your life into a nightmare. Don't mix them. You have all the genius to build a swing in your backyard for God. That sounds like a hell of a lot more fun. Let's start laughing. Let's start working. Let's start drawing blueprints, gathering our talented friends. I will help you with my divine lyre and drum. Hafiz will sing 1,000 songs. Hafiz will say 1,000 words that you can take in your hands like golden axes and silver hammers and bronze saws and polished teak wood and strong silk ropes, because you carry all the ingredients to turn your existence into joy. Let's mix them, mix them, mix them. I will see you all next Wednesday with a new story and a new letter. Salam, peace, and shalom to all.
Thank you.